I work with a lot of startups, and a lot of them are trying to either be the biggest, or they're trying to get out there the fastest, or they're trying to have the best bells and whistles in terms of whatever their technology is. And I always tell them, look, it's not the biggest, the fastest, or the baddest mousetrap that gets the mice. It's the one with the stinkiest cheese. And so your goal is to have a signature that's really stinky, one that creates there's a story behind it, one that is distinctive and stands out versus the competition. And so you want that really stinky blue cheese, and that's what you need to go for. And that's the first step you need to do and accomplish if you want to become iconic.
So you're a smart business committed to innovation, to service and to modern marketing, and you're asking, what's next? Wondering how you can become even more innovative. My name is Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and this is the InnovaBuzz Podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Hi innovators, it's that time of week again, and it's great to be back with you and with another episode of the InnovaBuzz Podcast. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. I'm really excited to have on the podcast as my guest today, SoonYu, an international speaker and best-selling author on innovation and design. He's been featured on the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Entrepreneur. And his most recent book is called Iconic Advantage. Don't chase the new, innovate the old. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transformational Marketing Hub, where you'll find a host of free and exceptionally useful information to help you transform your marketing. You can access the Transformational Marketing Hub by visiting innovabiz.co/VIP. If you don't yet have an account, click the blue Take a Peek Inside button. It's free and exceptionally useful, and especially for you, my podcast audience. In our discussion today, Soon talked to me about the importance of focusing on relationships in driving innovation and change, and his own relationship strategy, which is well worth paying attention to. We talked about building an iconic brand and business by becoming indispensable. And we talked about why stinky cheese is important. Without further ado, then let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from SoonYu. Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from lovely San Francisco in the United States, SoonYu, who's an international speaker and best-selling author on innovation and design. He's been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Entrepreneur, among other things. And his most recent book is called Iconic Advantage, and it talks about how brands can build an advantage through becoming iconic. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about that today. Welcome to the podcast, Soon. It's a privilege to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I feel very privileged to be able to talk to your audience as far as they are. And I just love how innovation has just connected us and made us so much closer. So excited to be on your show, Jürgen.
Thanks. And Carla Johnson, who was our guest on episode 131, I think. I can't remember the number. I haven't got it written down here.
139. I'm looking at
139, okay. Of the InnovaBuzz podcast. She suggested we interview you and introduced us. So a big hello to Carla as well.
Thank you for Carla. And she's an amazing, amazing individual, and feel very honored that she has actually provided a recommendation.
Yeah. Now, you most recently served as Global VP of Innovation at VF Corporation, which people probably aren't that familiar with, or my audience might not be that familiar with, but they're the parent organization to over 30 global apparel companies, including things like the North Face, Timberland, Nautica, and Wrangler, which probably ring a bell with everyone because they are iconic. Now, prior to that, you worked at the Clorox Company and Chiquita Brands, and you're also founder and CEO of numerous venture-backed startups. So I'm really looking forward to learning from your depth of experience there with all those different brands. But before we talk about all things innovation and brands and marketing, let's find out a bit more about you as a person. So as a young child, what did you want to do when you grew up?
The first time I was asked that question is after I had broken my arm in second grade, and I was basically sitting in the doctor's office, and I think all the excitement, I got kind of woozy, and I just threw up into a little bin, and then he looked at me and go, congratulations, So now that you've had such a big accomplishment, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I go, I looked at him, and I think back then my inspiration was a little different than maybe today. It was John F. Kennedy. And so I said, yes, I think I want to be the president, especially after, depositing something in his bin for him. So yeah, that was early on what I really wanted to do. Now, obviously, I did not pursue that.
Yeah. Now, interesting looking into your background. You started off in electrical engineering. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, that's right. So back in high school, I was one of those folks that sort of dabbled in the left and the right brain. And on the left side, I definitely had the analytical, was it the left or right? I can't remember anymore. But anyway, there was an analytical side, and it liked solving problems, and it found math interesting. And then the other side of me was very much into aesthetics, visuals, experiences, emotions, stories. And so when I was leaving high school, I was trying to decide whether I was going to be an electrical engineer or a fashion designer. And I came from a very strict Asian family, and they just weren't going to pay for my schooling in fashion school. So I ended up going engineering and then spent the next 30 years trying to go back into fashion, which I ended up doing.
Yeah. Okay.
Full circle.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. That kind of explains a little bit how you ended up in marketing and branding because of that visual, the fascinating with the visual part. Yeah.
And how I ended up in innovation is basically I've been lost most of my life. And sometimes as an innovator, it's good to be lost because you end up finding things and collecting things along the way and trying to integrate things that you didn't think you're going to because you were lost.
Yeah, interesting perspective. Now, I saw you once described, and I don't know whether this was you or somebody else, but the quote is a self-taught master of human failure. And you tell a story of how you were recruited first at VF just because of that. So tell us more about that.
Wow, that is very, you're really pulling stuff from the ancient archives. But yes, that's indeed why I got hired at VF. They were doing a big search. It actually took 6 months and had evaluated, probably 100 candidates, and they'd narrow it down to 30, then down to a dozen, then finally down to 6. And in that process, when they were talking about this new hire for a company that was over 100 years old, that had done a lot of innovation in what I call product supply, and obviously in the nature of being in fashion, again, this is for VF, the apparel company, they've done a lot of what I call sustaining or incremental innovation because they're always changing up the product line and changing colors or buttons or zippers or whatever, but they hadn't done what I call really breakthrough or transformational innovation. So in that process, the board members said, look, we don't want somebody traditional. We want somebody that has a non-traditional background. In fact, of the pool, please hire the person that has had the most and biggest and most epic failures. So I rose to the top quite quickly because of all the failures I've had in my life. And, I began a lot of my talks with a scorecard of my personal failings. And I always start off with the number 4, which represents the number of times I've had to do career restarts. That's just a nice way of saying I got canned and fired because I was inept or incompetent or I failed at whatever I was doing. And it also meant that I was on the street looking for a new job or opportunity for the next 6 or 12 months. That's what I meant by career restarts. In that process, I've had 5 businesses that I started, unfortunately, dissolve. And the next number I always share is 6, and 6 is probably the hardest number of the scorecard, and that just represents the number of times I've had to sit across from people I love, I care about, that signed aboard for one of these startups I was creating, and I had to do a round of layoffs and basically say, I'm sorry, I'm not sure, afford you anymore. And those were really tough conversations. And the next number is 30 plus, which means that's the number of products that I've launched that have failed in the marketplace. Some as big as spending $30 million plus to try to get into market and still seeing no light of day. And the last number I share, which I don't think is probably relevant for your audience, but in the US it's an interesting number. I share the number 300. And so people go, 300 sounds like a really big number. And I go, actually, it's a really small number. And what it represents is, in the US, we have something called your credit score. And that is the basement that you can get. It talks about your credit worthiness to get like a home mortgage or a car loan. And most people in the US are in the 700 to 800. And 800 is the sort of 850 is the max you can get. 300 is a basement. And I've done it twice in my life. And only 0.1% of the universe or of the US population has actually even done it once. So that sort of gives you a sense of why I got hired at VF.
Okay. And I mean, that's fascinating that, I admire the fact that you own that, but, tell us a little bit about what was the thinking at VF that hired you there? Because I'm guessing that they said, you're a person that has bounced back from adversity or somebody that's learnt a lot of lessons along the way and you can make a contribution based on those things.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it. That's exactly right. I think one of the things they looked at is perseverance. It's less about how you failed, but whether or not you've been able to recover from the failure and with a growth mindset versus one where you sort of have a victim mindset. And the fact that you keep standing up and getting knocked down again, but standing up right after that, I think is a sign of both resilience, but also a sign of attitude, a sign of like, hey, I learned something from this and where can I go from this? And that it doesn't define myself or anybody. And so, I think that's one of the things that they were really looking for. The other thing is I think they were just looking for people that would stretch themselves, that were willing to go on a hunch, try new things, and even if there was no guaranteed outcome coming from that. And they realized that at VF, there was a lot of what I call sustaining and incremental innovation, but not enough breakthrough or transformational innovation. And in order to get that, they needed somebody who would be willing to both fail from a project basis, but fail from a cultural basis, meaning that to try to inject yourself into that type of culture and be willing to not totally fit in. They actually wanted somebody who would not totally fit in, and that was part of the strategy.
Now, I guess to balance that out, first of all, we have to say that you were hugely successful in your time at VF. That the growth of that company and those brands has been quite astounding. And the other thing that I just wanted to point out for the audience is I think, now I can't remember who to attribute this to, but I heard something a couple of weeks ago that was along the lines of the biggest thing holding us back is the fear of failure. So in a way that was perhaps what attracted VF to you at the time.
Yeah, I think so. And you're absolutely right that I was very fortunate in that I was blessed with a CEO that had patience, that had vision, that really backed me up through deed and through action. And I had a boss that was fantastic. And the combination of that with a great team allowed us to honestly weather probably the first 2 years. We were inept. We made a lot of mistakes. I pissed off so many people doing it the wrong way. And I learned a lot of things along the way that it wasn't really necessarily about the strength or quality of the innovation idea. It was about the strength and quality of the people and their ability to get excited about it. And I switched really quickly from trying to be or have the best innovation or best ideas to really become somebody that had the best relationships in order to get innovation to happen. And that was a big transition for me and a big learning curve for me. And a lot of it was not making the idea yours, but figuring out how in the world to make it other people's and other people's that mattered.
That's a really good point. Yeah, to bringing people on board and by doing it in that way, you kind of take ego out of the equation, don't you, and get people on board with the idea.
Yeah, in some ways you take your ego out of it, but you totally leverage their ego. So that's the secret. And when anything failed, I was the first to raise my hand and said, it's my fault. And that's why it failed. But the minute something was successful, I basically made sure that we renamed it after, Bob's principle, or it was Jurgen's theorem, or, I would name it, or I'd have your quote that something tremendous that you said, and it'd be at the beginning of the presentation, and it'd be seminal to why we did what we did. Or if there was I'd oftentimes begin presentations with, we believe this and we believe that, but we were wrong. And here's why we were wrong, because we sat down and met with blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah told us this and that. And when we looked at it, he or she was right. And it just disarmed everybody. And that was, a lot of it was internal. And, I think when you're in a large organization, most innovation doesn't die because of bad ideas or because of no consumer acceptance or because of lack of marketing dollars or whatever it might be. I think a lot of times they die because of internal fears. You talk about those fears. A lot of innovation, I'd say, runs into three walls. Either it's a wall of fear, like we were talking about, this idea of it might cannibalize my business, or it's going to be really difficult, or it's a wall of apathy because, hey, yeah, it sounds great, but when push comes to shove, your thing looks a lot harder than everything else I know how to do. So quite frankly, without, passive aggressively, I'm not going to do your thing, but I'm going to do everything else. And then the last one is a fear of disbelief. I don't know how many times I was told, prove it. So a lot of the challenges was just overcoming internal hurdles versus external ones.
Yeah, funny that it's kind of human nature in a way, but it's the dynamic in a big organization, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's just more to lose when you're in a big organization, and there's more people that you potentially could piss off.
I really loved your approach there about building the relationships and leveraging those relationships.
One more secret about that. Any big recommendation that I was going to do, I would know who's going to be in the room when I made that recommendation. I'd know months and months and months in advance. And I would literally map out a strategy for every single person in the room to, one, met with them prior, and two, whether through that meeting or through other ways of meeting again with them or whatever, I would, by the end of my recommendation, would have mentioned everybody in the room at least once, if not twice, if not three times during my presentation. And so at the end of it, it was hard for anyone to argue, because if everyone's name's mentioned and given credit for that or this, or a testimonial from them or a quote from them or a doctrine or principle named after them, whatever it might be, everyone felt like they co-created it and they felt ownership over it. And so it was really hard for the CEO, when he looked around the room, for anyone to disagree, because they were all authors.
Yeah. Great strategy. Love it. So in the book Iconic Advantage, so it's got a subtitle, Don't Chase the New, Innovate the Old. And the core principle there is that, businesses, whether it's small business or whether it's large business, they're always chasing the shiny new things. They're always looking for a massive breakthrough. And in doing so, they kind of ignore the little gems that might be within the organization that might just need a little bit of tweaking or dusting off the shelf and turn into the next big thing. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, one of the reasons I ended up landing with this conclusion is the first few years at VF were really spent on trying to bring all these shiny new objects into the organization. And a couple things happen with shiny new objects. One, it does attract a certain person because it's shiny new. But that same person, because of their proclivity to like shiny new objects, will quickly lose interest in your shiny new object when another shiny new object comes along. So oftentimes the people that you want and need their support, you have to fight them to keep their attention on something that all of a sudden is losing a little bit of its luster just because something else came along, right? They're what I consider dopamine sensitive, right? They really need that dopamine high, right? The other problem with shiny objects is they're harder. they're just more difficult because they don't plug into any existing organizational structure, any organizational tools, any organizational capabilities. And unfortunately, a lot of times they don't have organizational champions or people and talent to help bring it to life. And so, your degree of difficulty is 10x of anything else. And what I quickly learned as I was trying to visit all these other companies that were just doing innovation so much smarter than I was that they weren't ignoring shiny new objects or shiny new ideas. It's where they chose to apply the shiny new ideas. They oftentimes, more times out of 9, or more times out of not, they actually applied those shiny new ideas against existing iconic franchises, places where they already had strength, places where they already had a consumer base that loved them and cherished them and was actually excited about something new and fresh on an old franchise, where they already had, quite frankly, manufacturing and distribution and logistics already figured out, where they already had internal people and capabilities and tools and scales of economy because they have the number one brand or the just a strong consumer following, or retailers and distribution that's willing to take them without even having to do a sales meeting. So that's what I learned, is that they were taking these shiny new ideas and applying it against existing strengths, existing places where they had market momentum and capabilities. And that made them so much more successful with their innovation.
Yeah, that's really good. And I the other point, and this resonated with me, I think you talked about the example of Kodak in one of the interviews that I heard, and it resonated with me because I was in the photographic industry with AGFA at a time when digital photography was starting, and AGFA, just like Kodak, believed they were in the business of manufacturing and selling film, but what they're actually in the business of was capturing and storing memories. So to look at that shiny new object of digital photography, which at the time was pretty rubbish, and that was part of why, certainly at AGFA, it was deemed that was never going to threaten film. How wrong could that be? Businesses forget about what they're really delivering, what is the experience that they're delivering to customers, and how can they use that to build that iconic advantage and then leverage new ideas.
You bring up a really interesting point, because some people will talk to me and say, well, what if I'm this idea of innovating the old, I'm dealing with a category that's dying, or a brand that doesn't, it's primarily that they're dealing with categories that are kind of going away. And I said, look, when I say innovate the old, part of the old is, when you look at the old, it's what assets do I have that are valuable, that I shouldn't be throwing out with the baby in the bathwater, right? What are those assets? One of those assets is oftentimes, if you have a franchise that is doing really well, and especially a franchise that's iconic, is that you are a standard bearer for a key category benefit, or a segment benefit, or a niche benefit, whatever it might be. And your goal is to innovate against that benefit. And to your point with Kodak, is this idea, their benefit was the idea that they were the company that actually helped you remember what you want to remember the things in your life that are cherishable, and that bring you joy and happiness, and the people who bring you joy and happiness. That's their main benefit, and they lost sight of that. But in order to have full sight of it, actually means you have to create parts of the organization that are set up specifically to cannibalize your existing business model in order to continue to own the benefit. So a good example of that is somebody who does this well is Amazon. I think we all know Amazon early on was, books, right? Lots of books, cheap books. And then they went to CDs and music, and lots of CDs and lots of music. And then eventually went to lots of things and pretty cheap, right? But if you think about it today, if you look at what's available on the web space. Amazon doesn't carry everything on the web space. In fact, you can find stuff on eBay or Alibaba that's not carried by Amazon. So they don't actually have the world's biggest or most availability of everything. And they're not always the cheapest. Oftentimes they're close, but they're not actually always the cheapest. Where they are really building their strategy is on something that they had patented early on, whether it was by inspiration or by quite frankly, by accident. And that is the idea of one click. You know, when you hit one click, it means that you don't even do the payment. You don't do anything. It's just on its way to you right now, the minute you hit one click. And they continue to innovate around the benefit of one click. So they took one click early days and translated it to instantaneous downloads of music, of books, of videos. Then they took one click and they turned it into actually a physical one-click button. I don't know if you remember, in the US they launched something called the Dash button. And basically, if you wanted your favorite beer, you know, you basically could have a button on the refrigerator and you press that and then they'd be automatically shipping you a case of that or toilet paper or whatever it might be. And then they've taken one click and they've actually, you know, done it with groceries now, same day groceries, and obviously about Whole Foods, so you can buy organic groceries. But now you don't even need the website and don't even need a mouse to do one click, because now you have Alexa, and all you need to say is, Alexa, you know, order me my favorite whatever, and boom, it's on its way. And I guarantee you, my son's 9, but by the time he's half my age, he won't even remember that Amazon was a website. See, what Amazon's trying to solve is the benefit they own, which is no patience required. And if they continue to innovate against that, they don't care if they cannibalize all their web businesses. They don't care if they cannibalize the CDs and books and all. They are focused on innovating around that benefit.
That's a great example. And I remember reading when they first bought Whole Foods, and I thought, that's on the surface seems to be a strange kind of branching out. And then, as I mentioned to you before we started the recording, we were in San Francisco in July and August, and we had a Whole Foods nearby, so we went there quite often to do grocery shopping. Actually, a lot of good stuff there. And I watched what was going on there, and I thought, this is actually brilliant, because, you know, people were filling up their shopping trolleys, and then rather than having to carry it home on the bus, because a lot of people were on public transport or in bags if they were walking, they just deposit it there and it would be delivered home within 2 hours, I think was the promise. And I thought, well, that's brilliant, because what they're doing is leveraging the infrastructure they've already got in place to do the deliveries. They're expert at that, and it fits in with that whole one-button experience.
Yes, I mean, you've nailed it. That's exactly right. Now, just one thing to note about that, it's actually hard to create an organization like that, because most organizations aren't designed around having part of the organization set up to actually not only compete against you, but basically put you out of business. And that's the way Amazon is actually set up. And places like Google are set up that way too, where they basically have parts of the organization where they are their goal is to disrupt the current business. And their philosophy is, it's better we disrupt ourselves than somebody else disrupts us.
I was just going to say that a lot of experiences I had in the corporate world, people would say, well, you know, I don't want to do that. And I would always respond with, well, isn't it better we do that? Because otherwise the competitor will do it.
That's a great response, and you're dead on. But it's a really hard one, because you think about how organizations are set up. Large organizations, tend to have little fiefdoms, right? People like to consolidate power, and it's really discomforting to say, you know what? I'm in an organization where in 3 years I might be trying to find a new part of the organization that I have to build up my influence, my team, my credibility, and my learning curve I might be 0 on the learning curve and have to start all over again. That's frightening. That's frightening to anybody, and especially somebody who's sitting, 20, 30 years in the job that they've invested all that time to be where they're at, and that I'll have that all sort of pulled out from under you.
Okay, well, for anybody that's in a position with an organisation, or maybe they're running their own business and I don't know, treading water a little bit, what would you advise in terms of looking for what's iconic about their business, their brand, their products, and then innovating around that?
Sure. When we did our research, we looked at 50 companies that were looking at and intentionally and deliberately trying to create iconicity, this idea of becoming a standard bearer and standing for something that people recognize you for. That was their deliberate strategy. Most people, when I first raised the topic, thought, oh, well, becoming iconic is just something that you sort of luck your way into, and if you stick around long enough, then and the stars are aligned and the moon is shining the right way on you, and you get lucky, then you can reach that status. But boy, trying to plan for it or trying to design for that, come on, that seems like that this doesn't seem like it's possible. Well, I found quite the opposite. I found that it is actually a deliberate strategy with proven best practices and principles. One of the key things that we saw across these 50 companies that were focused on this strategy is that their iconic brands, services, and franchises shared three common qualities. And these qualities were, first, that there was something distinctive about that brand, that product, that brand, that service. And so that was the first and foremost, something that made them stand out versus the competition, to have their customers or consumers or clients take notice of them and remember them for. So that was the first quality. Second quality is that whatever that distinction was, whatever that difference was, it wasn't just memorable and different, but it was highly relevant and meaningful to the audience they wanted to be iconic to. And the key here wasn't that it was just relevant today. It wasn't just relevant last week or a couple of years before, but that it'd be relevant for perpetuity. And it was this idea of creating timeless relevance that was the trick. And the third quality is, for the audience that they wanted to become iconic to, they were universally recognized for that distinctive relevance. So with distinction, relevance, and recognition, and with a certain degree of timelessness about doing that, in that process, you become known for that distinctive relevance and become the standard bearer for that distinctive relevance, and thereby achieve iconicity. So knowing that those are the three qualities, what are the best practices and principles related to creating greater distinction, timeless relevance, and recognition? So I think the first and foremost question you need to think about, and this applies to big Fortune 500 companies, it applies to local surf shops, it applies to pizza parlor I worked with in San Francisco, is what's your signature? If I was literally to pull three of your clients, your customers, your consumers, and ask them, what makes you unique and different? What is your specific signature? One, could they name something? Two, would they all say the same thing, or would they say three different things? If they're saying three different things, you got a challenge. But assuming they say the same thing, would it be distinctive versus your competition? Or is that the same thing that your competition could easily claim and is easily recognized for? That's the first challenge. And so, for example, the pizza parlor I was talking about, they thought long and hard about it, and they wanted to be iconic in San Francisco's Potrero Hill. And so what they came up with, and that they're best known for, is their sourdough crust. It's amazing, but they're the only pizza parlor in San Francisco that does sourdough crust. And you've been to San Francisco, sourdough is actually part of the rich history of San Francisco. And so that's how they became distinctive. And I always say, I work with a lot of startups, and a lot of them are trying to either be the biggest, or they're trying to get out there the fastest, or they're trying to have the best bells and whistles in terms of whatever their technology is. And I always tell them, look, it's not the biggest, the fastest, or the baddest mousetrap that gets the mice. It's the one with the stinkiest cheese. And so your goal is to have a signature that's really stinky, one that creates there's a story behind it, one that is distinctive and stands out versus the competition. And so you want that really stinky blue cheese, and that's what you need to go for. And that's the first step you need to do and accomplish if you want to become iconic.
Yeah, great point. And I've just finished reading a new book by Jay Beer and Daniel Lemon called Talk Triggers. I don't know if you've read that already. And the talk trigger is kind of the iconic, memorable thing that they mention, and they've got some lovely examples in there as well. But that's certainly the sourdough crust in the pizza is one. And it's, you think, well, is that innovative? But if it's unique and memorable, then certainly it is.
Now, the key is to your point. So the second step is, once you have that stinky cheese, how do you keep it stinky, right? And so there are three things I always talk about to keep your relevance over time. First and foremost is really understand and reverse engineer or decompose what is it about you that people love about you that they actually want you to keep and to protect. What are the iconic elements that make you special and differentiated? And so that's first and foremost. But then once you understand that, then you need to marry the old, so-called the old, with the new. And therefore, you need to add new innovation against that. You need to add new stories against that. And you need to add new design, both visual and experiential, to the old in order to keep the old relevant. But it is important to protect the old because people love familiarity. And if every 2 years you look totally different than what you had previously, then you're not leveraging what's your signature. You look at the BMW 3 Series for the last 20 years. Even if I see an old 20-year-old BMW 3, I know it's a 3 Series, and I can see the evolution of the kidney grille, but there are 7 unique aspects of the BMW design language that carries over from each generation that makes the BMW, but also makes the 3 Series the 3 Series, and it's really unique. And in fact, they took that same philosophy when they purchased the Mini out of bankruptcy in 1999. One of the first things they had to do is kind of figure out what of the old Mini do we actually keep to create the new 2000 version of it, right? The 21st century Mini. And it's an interesting story to learn actually how they actually created the new Mini. You got a minute? I can tell you that story.
Yeah.
It's a fun story. So
I've got it listed down here to ask about anyway, so it's good.
Well, so what happened is most car companies, when they're going after a new design, they tend to put 3 separate and distinct design teams against those designs, and they basically have a bake-off between those 3 teams. And each of those 3 teams are kind of, sort of cordoned off into their little silos and into their little warehouses, and each are sort of set aside and not allowed to speak with each other for, I don't know, a month or 2 as they create the new claymation design for the next generation. If it's a really important design, they'll maybe put 5 design teams, because you have to think these design teams spend a lot of money because you probably have 8 or 9 people working on each design team. Well, when BMW bought Mini, they didn't just have 3 or 5 design teams. They didn't want to mess up an iconic franchise, especially an English one. Here's a German company buying an English iconic franchise and totally, messing it to pieces, right? So they went a little overboard. They had 15 design teams, okay? Most ever in their history. 15 design teams in 15, separate warehouses working feverishly on trying to create the new design. Well, the winning designer is Frank Stephenson and his team. Frank grew up, and he actually designed the first X5. He went on later after BMW to be the head of design for McLaren, for Ferrari, for Lamborghini. Ferrari, for, I'm trying to think who else, Maserati, Fiat, whole bunch, okay? But this is what Frank did. when he was designing the car, he actually, see what happened is the Mini came out in 1960. And it was very distinctive. It kind of fit the sort of swinging 60s of London, whatever, kind of the Austin Powers era. And it worked perfectly. The only issue is they didn't invest in what I call keeping it relevant. It was distinctive. It had a great signature. But the Mini that came off the line 30 years later in 1990 looked exactly like the same Mini that came off the line in 1960. They hadn't changed it for 30 years. Mm. So part of the issue was every design team was working with a 1960s model, and they're trying to figure out what the 2000 model would look like. And when after Frank won it, he kind of went around and he interviewed his counterparts and asked them how they went about it. And, they just sort of say, hey, I looked at what's happening and I used the old Mini as inspiration and I came up with my design. Well, Frank took a different tack. He took it decade by decade. And so he actually built 4 separate claymations in order to get to his final claymation. So he actually created a 1970s version of the Mini. Then he created a 1980s version of the Mini, and he created a 1990s before he finally created the 2000 version. Because for him, it was really critical to understand what should be infused based on the zeitgeist and the trends and what was happening in that era, and what needs to be protected in the lineage. And through that process, he kind of figured out what were the elements that made the Mini, and what were the elements that were allowed to be played with, that were allowed to be influenced by the era that they were in. And so that's actually how he won, is by he created 4 decades worth of the Mini.
Yeah, that's a great story. And in doing that, it bridges that time space, and so the timeless distinction and relevance bit is a lot easier to perhaps recognize and maintain over that time.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
All right, this has been really fascinating. I could go on and talk for hours on this, but
so could I, unfortunately. Your listeners are like, oh, come on, please, no more.
So I think I'd like to move on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field with some tips from your experience. So hopefully we can get, so there's 5 questions, and hopefully we can get some really good, insightful answers from you that's going to inspire people to go away and think about how they can make their brands more iconic. So what's the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you 2 because I love 2 of them. One is to be curious. Okay. And you just got to be curious. Yeah. Always have that growth mindset. But I think the other is have a mashup mindset. I find the best innovators are not only curious, but they love saying, hey, I saw some inspiration there. What if I married it with that? Oh, that might be really interesting. Oh, I love artificial intelligence, but I also love my cats. Why don't I do artificial intelligence for cats? And boom, there's a new innovation, So, all right. So that was 2 pieces of advice. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love it because a lot of people do say be curious, but how do you move on from that? So, yeah, great advice. What's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas or new products?
Best thing I've done to develop new ideas, new products. Probably the best thing that I've done is this idea of, I think of this idea of mashup in a different way. It's usually I have this really great idea, and the hardest thing is to not just execute the idea and run with it and then show it to the world and hope it's great. The hardest thing is to say, I'm going to go out and get feedback, and I'm going to listen for 2 things. One, where there are gaps versus trying to get defensive. It's so hard not to be defensive. And the second thing I always learn is, well, how it's this idea of option C thinking. I don't know if you know this idea, but Roger Martin, who's this great strategist and innovator, and was the former dean at the Rotman School and was the right hand for A.G. Lafley when A.G. was turning Procter into this mega brand machine, and Roger was his strategist. But anyway, Roger talks about this idea of integrative thinking, where he went out and looked at 50 CEOs to understand what made them similar. And when you look at somebody like Jack Welch versus Steve Jobs, he interviewed them all and he couldn't find any common links. But he did find one behavioral trait that they all did, and that was this. Whenever presented with an option A and an option B, a lot of people conventionally would say, I picked the option that has the highest number of pros and the least amount of cons. These great CEOs said, look, give me an option C. It gives me the best of both A and B and minimizes the worst of both A and B, and design me a new option. And so back to my point, it's this idea that in listening to other people, I then think, okay, how might I take what they've said or their idea or their criticism and incorporate it into what I've done? And that's what I oftentimes find the best ideas come from.
Yeah, great advice. And I like that you said, sort of, again, it's this idea of leaving your ego outside and listening to the feedback and what can you take from that feedback without being defensive and incorporate it into the option C.
Yeah, it's hard. It's not easy because, you feel so much ownership and passion, right? And they don't understand it. Let me explain it better.
Yeah, well, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? So
right.
It's one way to get an advantage. What's your favorite tool or system for improving your own productivity and allowing you to be more innovative?
There's a daily stuff, but I would say I'm not going to focus on daily. I'm going to focus on sort of the larger stroke. And that is going back to this idea of incorporating feedback. And one of the things I actually have when I was an innovator and throughout my life, or throughout at least my professional life, is I've always had an executive coach. And my coach's main job is to call bullshit on me, because I think humans have a unique ability to lie, not to others, but actually to lie to ourselves.
To themselves.
I mean, that is the hardest thing, is to see truth about yourself. And so I think the most important tool for self-improvement, but also just being grounded about what is meaningful for you and your life, and grounding you back to your values and your vision, is to have somebody that knows you well enough to call bullshit on you. And and you can't do it. It's too hard to say, well, I know how to call bullshit on myself. No.
No,
that's bullshit right there. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. In fact, usually, I mean, that's a defensive statement, right? No, I can do that myself.
Yeah, I don't need a coach. Anyone that says they don't need a coach, that's a lie. That's a lie.
Yeah. Yeah. So, great advice. And as you say, there's, the huge value in a coach, but not only a coach that knows you well and will do you that service of pulling you up and saying, no, that's BS.
Yes. It's the hardest thing.
It's funny because I had that experience today. My coach said, no, where are you going with this? This is, how's that serving you? She likes to ask that question. And, the answer often is, when she asks it, the answer often is, well, it's not. All right. So what's the best way to keep a project or a client on track?
Best way to keep a project client on track. Interesting question. I'll be honest, I'm sort of learning this whole world of consulting. And I've had my clients tell me, "You really suck at this. You don't really know how to manage this. You don't know how to milk me for more." I go, "No, I'm really bad at this, truthfully." And I find that I'm getting clients that there's clients where maybe you're always having to be in sell mode, and I'm sure that's part of the process of I mean, that's probably one of the best practices. I don't do that very well. So I think it's actually saying, hey, I'm not sure you need me right now. And if here are some areas I might be able to help you. One of the things that I tell that to my clients all the time, I think you can probably do this without me. I'm sure I can help I think I can help accelerate all that, but I'm also confident you could do this without me. And oftentimes this idea of like, I'm pulling the plug on them a little bit, it actually makes them say, whoa, wait, let's talk about it. So I don't know if that's meant to be reverse psychology, but I found that when I say, I don't think you guys need me for this, but I can help, actually works well.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach.
Because, does anyone really need a consultant? Sometimes, yes, obviously. But on a recurring basis, probably no. But is that the truth that you could actually help and help accelerate? Yeah. And is there value there? Yes. But do they actually absolutely need you? No, probably not. Or is there other people that they could hire to do the same thing I do and potentially do it better? Yeah, actually there is. So there's some truth in it, but there's also some psychology behind that.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for that. Now, the next question, I guess, comes back to the iconic advantage a little bit. So what's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
I really want everyone to think stinky cheese. Okay? Think super fragrant. If your cheese smells like everybody else's cheese, then you probably got either American cheese or some type of a mild cheddar. You are going after extra super sharp, blue cheese, was it Roquefort or whatever it's called? You really want cheese that stands out. And it is more important. And you might say, well, if it's so stinky, no one's going to like it. No, there are people that'll like it. And I actually always argue, look, it's better to be indispensable for 100 people than it is to be well known by 1 million people. And why I say that is when you're indispensable, that means that they can't live without you. And that means you're doing something amazingly well. And if you are able to codify what you do really well, first off, it means you're doing something really well, which is great. And then second, I'm assume that you will have the smarts to kind of reverse engineer and then codify what you do really well. Then scaling is actually really easy. When you have 100 diehard converts who are willing to give testimonials, because without you, they'd be basically, dead or they just couldn't live life, right? With the way the world's set up today, with social media, with all these platforms, it's easy to use them as your bullhorn.
That's such great advice, because a lot of people struggle with this idea of niching down and narrowing down on that very small audience, because they think, there's 1 million there that might need what I have, but then it dilutes the focus, it dilutes the message, and you don't get to that point of what you're talking about, of building that core of people that can't live without you, that are raving fans and that actually do a lot of the marketing for you.
Exactly. And the key word is indispensable. And you can't, if you're trying to be indispensable to 1 million people, you're not doing it right.
Yeah. All right. Great advice. Thanks for getting us through the buzz. So just circling back again to the book Iconic Advantage, is there a sequel in the pipeline?
There's probably a couple circling, and so yes, I'm right now focused on this idea of how helping people build great brands, and I'm on a mission because I fundamentally believe that as we go through life, there are brands that really resonate with us, and we have relationship with brands kind of like the way we have relationships with people. It becomes very personal. And just like with people we love, we don't want to fall out of love with them. We don't ever want to be on the fence with the people we love. We want to be all in with the people we love. And the same thing is true for the brands. We don't want to have a reason. One of my favorite brands is Porsche. And I don't have any reason ever to doubt why I love Porsche. I want every generation to be even better than last generation, but still look like the old generation, right? And so I'm excited that they understand this idea of iconic advantage and they practice it, because for me, they're protecting my love affair with them. And I want, and so I want to be all in and forever in love with Porsche. That's great. Now I am starting to investigate, once I get people on and hooked on the idea of building brands that are lasting, that stand the test of time, that then become iconic, and then that people love forever. I'm now helping, especially since I'm in San Francisco in the startup area, I'm really helping people think about how do you build not just iconic brands and services, but iconic categories. And what does it take to actually, while you're building the brand, to also create a new category?
Fascinating. So what do you mean by category?
Well, if you think about a new, what's ride sharing, or what is the shared economy with Airbnb? How do you do that? And some people think, well, it's just you launch and then you're out there long enough. I think that's true. But with new categories comes new behaviors, new routines, new expectations. It also comes with new language, new stories, new analogies. As a marketer building a brand within a new category, you have to know that these new things are happening. And what is your role? I think one of the central questions, what is your role in any of those? Are you helping to create new behaviors? Are you helping to create new expectations or routines? What's the language that you are helping to codify this? What are the stories or analogies you're using? Can you brand any one of those elements? Can you call this new behavior something that actually speaks to the essence of what you do? And somehow through that create leverage and competitive advantage to not only create new language for the category, but create competitive advantage for you, because every time somebody states or defines that new behavior, they actually are reminded of you. So I think there's just so many rich areas when you think about category creation that, one, what are the mechanics and how do you do it? And two, are there opportunities within that creation to actually brand them?
Yeah, really fascinating concept, and sounds like a topic of another podcast.
Totally.
Yeah. All right. So what's the number one piece of advice then that you'd give to any business owner who wants to be a leader in innovation?
Leader in innovation, I think first and foremost is understand what makes you unique and special and be relentless about innovating that. Because I think the hardest thing in innovation is there's too many things to innovate. And I almost wanted to write this book, Just Say No. Okay, that was an innovation book. Okay? It was all about innovation strategy. I think the hardest thing about innovation is knowing what to say no to, and saying no more than you say yes. Because if you can go instead of broad and broad and wide, go narrow and deep with your innovation, you're going to get better innovation, you get better creativity, and you're going to own it more than other people.
Yeah, that's great advice. Really innovate around what makes you unique and special, and be focused on that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Laser focused on it.
Yeah. Thanks, Sun. This has been really great. Now, where can people reach out and thank you for all that you've shared with us today?
Sure. I mean, I've got a website, and I might you can contact me there. It's SoonYu.com, SoonYu.com, and you follow me on Twitter at SoonSpeaks. So look forward to connecting with people.
Okay, and we'll have links in the show notes to those places. Finally, then, who would you like me to interview on a future InnovaBuzz podcast, and why?
Well, I was fortunate when I wrote this book to be introduced to this amazing, amazing case writer. And so he's been my co-author and been a co-contributor. And now he's on his third book on his own. And he just released a new book on how to get great ideas. And it really challenges the conventional wisdom on brainstorming and ideation and all that. And he really looks at the science and mechanics of human behavior, but also of the brain. and he pulls that apart and shares it in such an entertaining way. And on top of that, he's Scottish, so he's got an incredible accent that's very charming, and he's quite frankly very bombastic, which also makes him a great guest. So Dave Burrs is who I would recommend you interview because he'll be such a fun interview.
All right. Well, I look forward to that. I love Scottish accents. So, Dave, if you're listening to this, look out for an invitation from us, the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of SoonYu. All right, then. Thanks again for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously today, Sun. It's been a really enjoyable and very insightful. I've learned a lot. I've got a page and a half of notes here. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope the audience gets a lot out of this as well. So I wish you all the best for the future, and let's keep in touch.
Yes, thank you, and thank you to the audience. And it was a lot of fun. Thanks, Jürgen.
I hope you enjoyed that illuminating conversation with Sun, and as I did, noted some ideas from his experience. There was so much great advice and content in the interview. I'll highlight just one here, and that is the importance of getting feedback, taking that feedback on board without defensiveness, and adapting it with the insights from that feedback into what you're doing. I'd love to know what you took away from Sun's interview. Leave a comment below the blog post, which can be found at innovabiz.co/SoonYu. That is SOONYU. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/SoonYu. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Sun there, as well as links to the resources that we mentioned. Sun suggested I interview Dave Burrs, his co-author of Iconic Advantage and also author of How to Get Great Ideas, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast. So Dave, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of SoonYu. Remember to visit innovabiz.co/VIP to access the Transformational Marketing Hub and all of its free and exceptionally useful information. It will help you transform your marketing. Stay connected. Head on over to iTunes or Stitcher or Pocket Casts and subscribe to the InnovaBuzz podcast so you make sure you'll never miss another episode. We'd also love you to leave us a review, because what you think matters. Take some of the ideas you've heard today and apply them in your business. Any thoughts, ideas, suggestions or questions, share them in the comments below the blog post. And remember, if you want to get better marketing results than you ever have, join our fantastic LinkedIn community at the Transformational Marketing Academy. All you have to do is go to innovabiz.co/TMAC. It's free to join. Hope to see you there soon. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember to be awesome and keep innovating.